Well, I got my notes, check. Sunglasses, check. Hat, check. Pepsi, check. Thick skin, check. Let's go. Hey, welcome to Golden Blue Dude, everybody. If you're a college football fan, might as well hit the like and subscribe button because that's all we do over here. Go check out our Patreon page. We call our Patreons the shot callers because that's exactly what they do around here. And when the regular season gets here, our Patreons will get to decide which game we'll live stream, and you'll get to watch with Golden Blue Dude. And the score prediction contest will be coming back. Every week I pick out a game and my Patreons guess the score, and whoever comes closest to the score wins 20 bucks every single week, and you can win as many times as you want. The higher the Patreon, the more guesses you get per week. Well, I'm hearing a lot of questions from my fellow Mountaineer fans because what happened yesterday with UCLA and USC headed over to the Big Ten, this is going to have a ripple effect. So us as Mountaineer fans, we want to know where we stand. How does this affect West Virginia? Well, honestly, there's no clear answer. There's some good news and then there's some bad news. The good news is I have been hearing West Virginia and Notre Dame to the ACC for a very, very long time. And then recently, Notre Dame going to the ACC picked up a lot of steam. Even Notre Dame fans themselves were talking about it. Notre Dame YouTube channels were talking about it. Notre Dame news sources were talking about it. So that news started to heat up, and that backs up what I've been saying, that the ACC does, in fact, want Notre Dame and West Virginia. I already gave you all the numbers, how much West Virginia would add to the ACC. It would help the ACC, not just in terms of the fans that West Virginia brings, but it would also make the fans that are already in the ACC watch the games more whenever their teams play West Virginia. They'd be even more interested. Does this change anything? The short answer is maybe. I don't know for sure, but there's a few ways to look at this, okay? There's the good news and the bad news. I like to give the bad news first, all right? So the bad news is, well, the SEC and the Big Ten could be going after teams in the Big 12 next. And if it's not West Virginia might be on a sinking ship right now. So looking forward, the Big Ten and the SEC, I know for a fact that they're not done. So their next target could be the Big 12. Now, if one of the teams on their radar is West Virginia, then no problem. We don't even need to go on. But if West Virginia isn't on their radar and they're targeting other teams on the Big 12, that's a big problem for West Virginia because that option of staying in the Big 12, which some West Virginia fans are holding on to, would be out the window. You cannot stay in a conference that is a sinking ship. I'm talking to you, Pac-12 fans. If your team is not named Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA, you better hope that your team is looking at these other conferences saying, hey, we want in. We want in. This ship is sinking. We want out. We want in. Let us in. You better be hoping for that because the Pac-12 has just become even more irrelevant. Well, the same situation could happen to the Big 12 if the Big 10 and the SEC are interested in the Big 12. And trust me, I truly believe that they are interested in the Big 12. Why would they not be? Their ultimate goal is to be up near, 24, 32 members. And some of those could be members out of the Big 12 because the Big 12 still has some pretty good brands in there right now. So for West Virginia, if West Virginia is on the docket, then hey, no big deal. But if not, then it is a sinking ship, and West Virginia might be sinking with the ship if they can't find an alternative. The second part of this bad news for West Virginia is the SEC might actually be eyeing ACC teams, which means the ACC would be taken off the list of options for West Virginia because the ACC themselves would then be a sinking ship. So that's another part of this bad news because what yesterday made people realize is that the Big Ten and the SEC, they're going to be aggressive now, okay? No team is safe. No fan base is safe. They are going to be aggressive. And if they knock on the door of a school, that school is leaving. So the other schools that don't get that knock need to have options. Now that I have you nice and freaked out, West Virginia fans, there is some good news here. The good news is what I was talking about earlier. Maybe the Big Ten and the SEC are actually interested in West Virginia. Because if you rewind to the last conference realignment, the SEC was indeed interested in West Virginia. It came down to West Virginia and Missouri coupled with Texas A&M. Now, the SEC was very close to extending the invite to West Virginia. ESPN said, hold on, let's think about this. Actually, you know what? We want to extend our footprint a little farther west So we need you to extend the invitation to Missouri, not West Virginia. If you do that, you'll get the money that you're wanting. So give it to Missouri, not West Virginia. So we were literally about to be invited, And then, of course, ESPN screws us. So yeah, that's another reason why West Virginians don't like ESPN. Now, the other part of this good news is recent developments may have the ACC panicking and making the West Virginia plus Notre Dame edition happen even faster. In other words, a higher sense of urgency to get things done. Because what I've been talking about, Notre Dame and West Virginia to the ACC, that's a real thing. That's been happening. But recent events can change things. Maybe the Big Ten or the SEC is interested in Notre Dame. So instead of kicking back and saying, you know what, we're going to let things play out. We know we have West Virginia and Notre Dame. That's going to happen. But let's take our time about this. With recent events, it might actually make the ACC speed things up and say, all right, we need this to happen sooner rather than later. Let's get the invites to Notre Dame and West Virginia ASAP. So there is some good news in this situation. But then again, you know what I was talking about earlier, the Big Ten and the SEC are probably interested in Notre Dame. Now, in Notre Dame's contract, it does say that if they join a conference before 2036, it has to be the ACC. I don't know how ironclad that is, and I don't know the penalty of that either. But what I'm also hearing is Notre Dame really liked their stay full-time in the ACC in 2020. That was kind of a test drive for Notre Dame, and they said they really, really liked it. They saw that the conference was winnable, and then in the future, you know, with playoff expansion, get that bye week, you have to be a conference champion. So the fact is, Notre Dame fans, you're going to have to get over it. You're not staying independent forever. That's not happening. You will join a conference. The question is, which conference? Now, the ACC does have a slight leg up in the fact that the contract says Notre Dame has to join the ACC before 2036 if they do join a conference. So they do have that going for them. And they have the fact that Notre Dame really, really liked 2020. They enjoyed being a full-time member and being in the ACC championship and having the spotlight. And they got to the playoffs. Notre Dame liked that. That's another check mark for the ACC. And the fact that the ACC is an actual winnable conference for Notre Dame. So whenever playoff expansion does happen, they can get a playoff bye by winning the ACC, because only the top 4 champions, conference champions, get that bye week. And if you think Notre Dame isn't worried about that bye week, you're fooling yourself. Of course they want that bye week. Everybody wants that bye week. That is a tremendous advantage. And with the ACC adding Notre Dame and West Virginia, they could renegotiate that TV deal. The question is, how much money could they get out of that? How much could they bump it up? Because they really, really need to keep Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and North Carolina to make this thing work, because if those teams leave, then it's not going to work at all. So they need something to keep those big brands in the ACC. So the question is, how much more money can they get from adding West Virginia and Notre Dame? I think they can get significantly more, but I don't know if it would be enough to compete with the SEC and the Big Ten. I know that the ACC is allowing Notre Dame to keep their contract with NBC, so Notre Dame would still get that contract TV money from NBC, and they would get their share from the ACC. So really, for Notre Dame, it's a question of control versus money. And that might decide where West Virginia goes, because they're supposed to be paired with Notre Dame to go to the ACC. So the future of West Virginia might hinge on Notre Dame as well. That's the one thing that I don't like about this. I don't think that West Virginia controls their own future. They're at the mercy of these other conferences and, of course, Notre Dame. So the best case scenario is the SEC is once again interested in West Virginia. They extend the invite. We're in the SEC. We're in the clear. That's it. We're in the clear. Everything else can happen and we don't have to worry about it. We're in the clear. Or the ACC brings in West Virginia and Notre Dame, and they make enough money to where they're allowed to keep Clemson, North Carolina, Miami, Florida State, all the big brands. That would also be a best case scenario. Fend off the SEC and the Big Ten. And it was all because of Notre Dame and West Virginia giving the ACC the leverage to renegotiate that TV deal. That would really make us feel good about ourselves, wouldn't it? What about worst case scenario? I don't like talking about this, but it's definitely a possibility. Well, the Big Ten and the SEC could be eyeing teams out of the Big 12, and none of those teams are named West Virginia. And then the ACC also gets picked apart, so that's taken off the table as well. And West Virginia has just landed in no man's land. Now, I definitely don't see that happening, because a lot of bad things would have to happen for that to be the reality. But it is possible. Something to think about. about. So in any case, the good news is really good, and the bad news is really, really bad. What about the in-between news? Well, maybe the Big 12 can somehow fend off the Big 10 and the SEC, but I don't see it happening, and they stay relevant somehow. I just don't see that happening. I do think the Big 10 and the SEC will come a-knocking on the Big 12's door and grab some brands. West Virginia better have an exit strategy, and they better have it right now, because nobody is safe. If you think the Big 12 stands a chance of fending off the Big 10 and the SEC, if they indeed do come a-knocking, which I think they will, then you're fooling yourself. That's false hope. You might as well get rid of it. Don't be like the Pac-12 and not have a backup plan. You gotta start acting proactive and not reactive. Y'all let me know in the comments section, which case do you think is actually gonna happen? You think it's the best case, the worst case, or some case in between? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.